Welcome, everyone. You're all so punctual. Thanks for joining. We'll get started in just a moment. But while we're waiting for others to join, if you could introduce yourself in the chat and perhaps include where you're from, both in geography and possibly in the native land in which you're occupying, that would be great. The webinar today is presented by Greenbelt Alliance and would not be possible without our many donors and supporters. We really appreciate all of the support from everyone on this call and everyone else who supports us. So thank you. All right. Well, I think we will go ahead and get started. So welcome. My name is Zoe Siegel. I am the Senior Director of Climate Resilience here at Greenbelt Alliance. And we are so excited to introduce you to our Bay Area's Resilience Hotspots project and give you a first look at the initial results of this multi-year effort to identify opportunities to advance nature-based climate resilience through community-driven processes. If this is your first time joining us, I'd like to welcome you on behalf of Greenbelt Alliance. We are a nonprofit organization based in the San Francisco Bay Area, celebrating our 65th anniversary this year. Our mission is to educate, advocate, and collaborate to make the Bay Area's lands and communities more resilient to a changing climate. So a little bit more about Greenbelt Alliance. As an environmental organization, we leverage our expertise in land use policy advocacy and regional collaboration to realize a climate resilient Bay Area, a region where all residents have access to nature and are able to recover quickly after the next wildfire, flood, or heat event, and have affordable housing close to where they work and play. Our approach to policy advocacy is informed by three key solutions: using nature to make people more resilient to a changing climate, making sure conservation, stewardship, and land use policies are informed by equity, and breaking down the silos to work collaboratively towards multi-benefit solutions. Before we dive in, I would also like to acknowledge the lands belonging to the many different Indigenous communities throughout the Bay Area. Resilience Hotspots focuses on protecting and restoring lands around the Bay Area, and we would be remiss to not acknowledge that we stand on unceded territories of the Ohlone people and want to take the time to recognize the historic discrimination and violence inflicted upon Indigenous peoples in California and the Americas, including their forced removal from their ancestral lands, and the deliberate and systemic ethnic cleansing of their communities and culture, which continues to this day through displacement, gentrification, and racism. Greenbelt Alliance is committed to taking action in order to foster a culture that acknowledges these harms, shows empathy and care, and demonstrates positive steps towards reconciliation and repair, while also creating space to uplift Indigenous traditional ecological knowledge and grassroots movements. This land acknowledgement is just a starting point. Our organization supports campaigns like the one to protect Eurostack, the sacred lands of the Amamutsan tribal band near Gilroy, that is under threat of being turned into a sand and gravel mine presently. This is one of the hundreds of Indigenous-led grassroots campaigns you can support in the Bay Area. And you can learn more about which lands you occupy by going to the link in the chat and seeing how you can pay a land tax or to a land trust or get involved in a campaign. So the Resilience Hotspot initiative we're launching today would not be possible without the dedicated leaders around the Bay Area who are partnering with us to realize a safer, more resilient Bay Area. So now I'm supposed to pass the mic over to our Senior Resilience Manager, Sadie Wilson, and I will in a moment. But first, I wanted to acknowledge all the dedicated work it took from her and others to get us to this monumental moment. Sadie, your dedication, perseverance, and thoughtfulness for this initiative has really left an incredible impact on this project, this organization, and in the hotspot communities as well. In this webinar, we're going to focus on the people and places impacted by, but a great deal of research and data analysis got us to this point. Sadie, and also I want to mention our Civic Spark fellow, Nate, the depth and thoroughness of your research and analysis and ability to draw meaningful connections and conclusions has been instrumental in getting us to where we are today. The commitment, energy, and compassion from Sadie, Nate, and the rest of the team, This has been a full team effort, has been truly inspiring. We may be launching hotspots today, but this is just the beginning, and I'm truly thrilled that this project has great community partners and a stellar Greenbelt team led by Sadie. Sadie, your work has made a significant difference already, and your energy and compassion has permeated every aspect of this project. So now, without further ado, I will pass this off to Sadie.
Thank you, Zoe. So today, I will be sharing more information about the Bay Area Resilience Hotspots initiative, why we're doing this work, and where we're prioritizing nature-based resilience through local community partnerships. But what I'm most excited for is to welcome 3 of our community partners from Hotspots locations to share their unique approaches to climate resilience and how we're working together to advance on-the-ground projects. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end, so please put any questions you may have in the Q&A feature. And if you have comments throughout the presentation, please feel free to share them in the chat. So first off, what is a resilience hotspot? These are locations where there is great opportunity to prioritize nature-based climate resilience to mitigate mounting risks from wildfire, flooding, and extreme heat. Places where we must devote funding and resources to collaboratively identify climate solutions that address physical hazards, but also address root causes of inequality through comprehensive planning and policymaking. The only way to do this is by partnering with local leaders and rooted organizations to work towards true multi-benefit solutions. So going back, as we know, climate resilience is needed now more than ever. Just in the past year, we experienced devastating winter storms in California that resulted in over $5 billion in damages. We saw record-breaking heat conditions in Santa Rosa as temperatures hit 115 degrees. And while we haven't gotten deep into fire season yet, the rest of the continent has been getting a glimpse of the apocalyptic skies we all remember from 2020. But this work is not about scaring people into action. It's about identifying opportunities to work towards a healthier and more equitable Bay Area for all. So it's also important to acknowledge the major wins. This past year, California's Department of Natural Resources launched the 30 by 30 initiative to conserve 30% of the state's lands by 2030. Not to mention all of the local action that is going on right here in the Bay Area, where leaders in regional government, research institutions, and local organizations are working on innovative solutions to our climate and housing crises. But even with all of the champions, all of the resources, all of the expertise that we have here in the Bay Area, we still aren't seeing the action that we need in the places that will be most impacted, our climate resilient, our climate vulnerable communities. So the first part of this effort was understanding what barriers are holding us back. And with that, we set out to create a blueprint for leading with nature and investing in people. First, acknowledging that our current patterns of climate adaptation are highly unequal, with adaptation activities happening first in wealthy, well-resourced places to protect high-value property, we sought to identify the highest priority places to invest in nature-based solutions to serve communities most in need. Next, we partnered with community leaders because we know that successful projects have long-term community-based climate champions that are involved from the start. Right now, many of our local leaders and organizations that are doing this work lack the resources and capacity to advance these transformational adaptation and resilience projects. Our Resilience Hotspots initiative seeks to support these climate champions in funding and implementing on-the-ground projects within their own communities. And finally, this project is all about working across silos to bring advocates and city staff and electeds all to the table to think big and take action for the future of their cities. So with that in mind, now I'll give you a bit more detail about how we approach this project to do things differently and achieve our goals collaboratively. So the first phase in our Resilience Hotspots process was conducting spatial data analyses that were informed by technical advisors to identify the places where we wanted to dig deeper. And, rather than stopping there and saying, here are the places, we're done, we wanted to poke holes to understand how this data was lining up with lived experiences and what was missing. So to do that, we connected with local partners and organizations through community meetings, interviews, and events, where we were able to build those strong relationships with folks working on the ground. This mixed methods approach not only uncovered unique social and economic aspects of climate vulnerability, but also surfaced opportunities and priorities that are so important in building a vision that people can rally around. Next, this project is different partly because of our unique positionality and values that have guided how we approach this work. We developed unique methodologies to produce our wildfire flooding and extreme heat priority hotspots maps that overlay climate risk with social vulnerabilities and conservation needs to understand opportunities for nature-based resilience, which is a key part of our mission and our work. And as you can see here at the right, and explore by visiting the website that's now live and would be great to visit after the webinar. These are the 18 places around the Bay Area that we've identified as resilience hotspots. And finally, this is a project not just about data or where there is the most climate risk, but more importantly, about developing the relationships and foundations that we need for action. And this was really a turning point for us, because when this project was first imagined and in its earlier stages, it was more about the where, with the goal of producing a map. But then when we were asking ourselves, okay, what's next? The answer was really, more than anything, we want this to lead to action, to make change in partnership with communities. And to do that, we need to connect, asking these communities from the start what they see as barriers to resilience, and together identifying what's next and how Greenbelt Alliance can play a role to advance their vision. And so at the core of it, that is what Resilience Hotspots is about. It's about listening to the needs and visions and priorities of communities and working together to translate those needs into actions. So after our mapping phase, we started with 5 locations to go deeper in this way. And we're excited to let this project lead the future of Greenbelt Alliance for years to come. The 5 places we started with all represent different resilience challenges, different landscapes of local actors and priorities, and different opportunities to build resilience. Newark in Alameda County, Southwest Santa Rosa in Sonoma County, Gilroy in Santa Clara County, Suisun City in Solano County, and North Richmond in Contra Costa County. For each of these 5 locations, we worked with local organizations and leaders to assemble a community resilience profile that highlights local stakeholders, climate risks, and social vulnerabilities, opportunities for nature-based resilience, and next steps for action. These interactive profiles are part of the next phase of our Hotspots launch in July, where you'll be able to go deep in exploring the stories of each of these communities to discover why they're resilience hotspots and what we're doing next. Now, I'm delighted to introduce 3 of our community partners joining us today. Marty Estrada is the Director of Community Development for CARAS, the Community Agency for Resources, Advocacy, and Services, working in Southern Santa Clara County. Jana Sokale is a Newark resident and tireless advocate, leading the fight to protect Newark's shoreline areas from development as part of the Citizens Committee to Complete the Refuge. And Alex Lanine is the Resilient Communities Program Manager with Sustainable Solano, a grassroots organization working all over Solano County to promote sustainable and just futures. So as I mentioned, the full stories of these hotspots locations will be launching in July, but to set the stage for a discussion, I will briefly share a little overview of what makes each of these places a hotspot, and then we'll turn it over to our panelists. So remember to use the Q&A if you have questions coming up. So first, Suisun City is a small city of roughly 30,000 residents located at the mouth of the Delta in the San Francisco Bay. It's adjacent to the Suisun Marsh, which is the largest brackish water marsh in the West and home to hundreds of unique species. Sea level rise will not only impact residents, businesses, and infrastructure in Suisun, but also will cause major disruptions to the wetland ecosystem. With 84 inches of sea level rise, which we're likely to experience by 2100, over 700 acres of Suisun would be inundated with water. This includes City Hall, the waterfront district, hundreds of homes, and flooding of the railroad and into neighboring Fairfield. While 2100 may sound far away, we'll likely get a glimpse of what this will look like over the next couple decades with storm surge and rising sea level. On top of flood risk, many Sassoon residents are facing high housing costs relative to income, which makes it even more difficult to respond and recover in the face of a flood event. But the story isn't all doom and gloom. Sassoon has some amazing leaders that are championing climate action, including their mayor, Alma Hernandez, Emily Corbin with the local sewer district, and Sustainable Solano, who we'll hear more about in a minute from Alex. This is an incredible place to explore nature-based solutions to protect residents and infrastructure from flooding, while also connecting more people to nature and all it has to offer. Next, at the very southern end of Santa Clara County, Gilroy sits in a rich agricultural valley between the Santa Cruz Mountains and the Diablo Range. While many may know Gilroy for their garlic, not many people are aware of the intersecting climate hazards that have made it increasingly hard for the community to recover after each shock. Gilroy has always struggled with flooding due to its valley location and confluence of rivers, but climate change has made storms more severe, and decades of development have increased runoff, together resulting in disastrous floods, like the ones we saw this past winter when Highway 101 in Gilroy was shut down for days. In addition to flooding, Gilroy experiences some of the highest extreme heat risks in the county as a result of inadequate access to tree canopy, as well as high pollution burdens and housing that only makes these hot days feel hotter. Gilroy's farm worker communities and residents working outdoors are disproportionately impacted by wildfire smoke in hot days, but rarely do planning and policy processes honestly incorporate these voices. But with Karas and Councilmember Zach Hilton leading the way, there is huge opportunity to rethink how we understand resilience, to include the full spectrum of physical, social, and economic factors that impact how folks experience climate change. And finally, Newark, a small city nestled between Fremont and Union City along the southern Alameda shoreline, home to the historic San Francisco Bay National Wildlife Refuge, the first urban wildlife refuge in the country. Newark's origins, tied up with the railroad industry, led to a highly industrialized shoreline that today is dominated by mostly warehouse uses and cargo salt pond operations. Over the last decade, the severe housing shortage has increased the pressure to develop in the shoreline area, and the lack of protections has put the wetland's health and future into question. With just 66 inches of sea level rise expected in just 50 years, Newark's shoreline residents, its vital rail line, and lingering chemicals from a century of industrial uses will be inundated with water. Wetlands will need to migrate inland to survive sea level rise, just like people. But without making room, our wetlands will flood and no longer be able to provide protection from storm surges, provide habitat for over 700 species, or act as a wonderful resource to our community. In addition to sea level rise, a new study has found that shallow groundwater conditions in Newark will result in inland flooding in unexpected places as sea level rise pushes up the groundwater table. Newark is facing huge risks, but with that also comes an incredible opportunity to lead the way in reconnecting to the shoreline and working towards a vision for Newark where nature and people can thrive. To get there, Newark's council member Mike Bucci is leading the way along with strong local partners and residents, including Taran Singh, who organizes cleanups along the shoreline, and of course, the Citizens Committee to complete the refuge who we'll hear more about from Jana. So with that, I will stop talking and we will get started with our panel discussion. Welcome all of our panelists, and we'll just jump right in, and I'll offer to our panelists if you want to add a bit about your organization as you answer these first questions, go ahead. So to start it off, each of your organizations works locally to bolster climate resilience in different ways, from garden installations and stormwater management education to wetland protection and community services. How would you describe the connection between your work and climate resilience, whether that be physical, social, or economic resilience? And Marty, why don't we start off with you, and then we can go to Jana and then Alex.
Thank you, Saudi. Thank you, everybody. My name is Marty Estrada from Community Agency for Resource Advocacy and Services called CARAS here in South County in Gilroy, California. And the question again, Saudi, was?
How would you describe the connection between your work and climate resilience?
Oh, well, that's an easy one. We're at the Wild Wild West, they call it in Gilroy. We have the highest index of heat. When there's a fire in the Bay Area, we're hit it, pollution wise, we get hit the most. There's a lack of resources for marginalized communities. We need climate adaptation mitigation efforts big time in South County. And how does it relate? Because we have the highest index of heat. When there's flooding, we get flooded, right? And when there's heat, we get power outages like crazy all over our area in Gilroy. So we definitely need a climate hub. We need to develop resources to build a bridge and build a gap by those that don't have and those that have, and put a focus really on climate change, how this is changing the landscape and how it's affecting every community, in our community as well in South County, that we need to address. And galvanizing the community is a key component of my effort, and building that climate resiliency to make sure that people understand that this is happening and how can we together mitigate these efforts. Thank you.
Thanks, Marty. Jonna, if we can move over to you about how your work with CCCR is connected to climate resilience.
Thanks, Sadie. Yes, I'm Jonna Soquel with the Citizens Committee to Complete the Refuge. The Citizens came together as a grassroots organization in 1965. So we've been around for a long time, and it was founded then because of the concern over the filling and the degradation happening all along the shoreline. And we're still at work today. The group first helped to organize and helped to create the Don Edwards San Francisco Bay National Wildlife Refuge, largest urban national wildlife refuge in the country. And then we continue to work to preserve the bay. So our concern is for the physical vibrancy of San Francisco Bay. But the only way that you can do that is by engaging the community and working with society to do that. So really what we have done over the decades is we have worked to engage in the decision-making process on every level of government for decisions that happen around the Bay. Whether we're commenting on a development proposal along the shorelines of the Bay, whether we're engaging on policy decisions at some of the regional agencies, or whether we're even contributing to policies set at the state and federal level that affect clean water, clean air, endangered species. So even though we work locally, we recognize that decisions made throughout the country affect the health and the longevity of the Bay. Ultimately, we believe, though, that the contributions we make to the physical Bay directly are tied to the long-term health and sustainability of the Bay, but also to the long-term health and economic resilience of the families who live around the Bay. And we've seen that as climate change has had more and more impacts. We recognize that not everyone is on equal footing to deal with climate change. And we question developments and the sustainability of the developments around the Bay today for families to be able to receive insurance, to be able to get mortgages on these properties, and to risk displacement as sea levels rise and people need to find new places. So our work is physical, but it's also social, and it's also relates directly to the sustainable economy of the Bay.
Thank you, Jonna. Alex, I'll just repeat. How would you describe your connection between your work and climate resilience?
Yeah. So when it comes to, like, I guess the physical, social, and economic components, I think that we try our best to make sure we kind of hit all three heads there in our climate resiliency work. Sustainable Solano actually started off as a collection of community gardens in Benicia, and that sort of like physical connection to land definitely permeates through the majority of our programs. It's something that I'm a bit more tangentially involved with, but as far as like physical resiliency goes, we really try our best to have the education and material installation of gardens to teach folks about how they themselves could be more climate resilient, environmentally resilient, and sustainable in general. In Sassoon specifically, we have installed 3 drought and flood resilient gardens. But beyond that, you know, as far as our residency work goes, I believe like our main focus is going to end up being that more social and economic component, bringing community together to be decision makers and bring them to the table to hopefully, you know, improve, you know, the state of resiliency in Sassoon and Solano as a whole, predominantly through education and the creation of community action plans.
Awesome. Thank you all. So now, Marty, I want to talk about Gilroy. This is a place exposed to multiple climate risks. We know flooding, extreme heat, wildfire smoke, while also experiencing significant pollution burdens and challenges related to housing cost, housing availability. Can you talk a bit about some of those social and economic factors and how it can, you know, result in disproportionate risk for some of the populations you work with? And talk about some of the, you know, how those social inequalities can make climate impacts worse, and maybe some of what CARES does to relieve that.
Yeah, thank you. CARES was created in South County to support. It was a grassroots effort to support the community from all parts of the community. We provide services in legal services, youth services to boys and girls, senior services, homeless prevention programs. And we started getting into the climate change because we noticed it affected the most vulnerable population of our county, and that's our marginalized community. And in our marginalized community, 59.1% are Latino, low income. There's not enough housing in South County. So I started tracking through surveys, what is needed. It started developing partnerships to develop resiliency through climate change and adaptation, and figuring out what is it that's needed. And in our studies and in our workshops with our community, multiple workshops with the community, we found out that there's key indicators that they said that were needed. We wanted to lend their voice to the issue, to address the concerns of the community. And in that, we found that heat index was high. Folks that work outside doors, 40% said that it was bad for them. There was a lot of folks that indicated that there was a problem with health and wellness when there's power outages. And so we started putting together a lot of workshops with community. And then I started thinking, you know, what I need to do is we need to include youth, because youth have power in the way they view things. And we want to make the next climate leaders around youth. We want to develop youth to develop those learning lessons about what is climate adaptation. What does it mean that it's affecting you and your family? We found out that a lot of folks don't know, because of the lack of education through climate change. They don't know how to get resources. They don't know what to do. During the fires back in 2020, all that smoke, believe it or not, went from North Bay all the way to south, and it stayed in Gilroy. And Gilroy's like in a valley. So all that smoke stayed there. Folks did not have N95 masks to support themselves, and they were breathing in this toxic pollution. And so I started thinking, you know, we need to do something differently, but we need to attack not just social, not just social issue, not just the community, but we need to get involved stakeholders from the state level as well, and at the county level, because this is a big issue. Everybody has their own type of climate issue in their natural areas, and we have ours. And so we started building on folks and developing a system of how can we address what are the needs that you think that you might need when there's a power outage. Cooling centers. Folks needed battery packs for their phones, flashlights. When there's power pollution, what do you need? They need N95 masks. They need how to get to. They need alert system, education about communication. When things happen, who do we contact? Do we need an app? Do we need to create an app to do this? And so there was a lot of moving pieces and moving parts when the floods came. who was triaging the floods when people were being displaced, farmers were being displaced, and there was nowhere to go. And there was a poor connection countywide to facilitate when this happens, the floods happens, where to guide people. People didn't even know that there was a center. So they were scattered. So there's a lot of stuff that we need to work towards in building a true climate resilience hub. But it starts with the community, the marginalized community. We invite them. They speak out, they're vocal about their concerns and their needs about health during this times of climate. And so that's what we're addressing. And through CARAS being a nonprofit, we were able to, because we have the trust of the community, we're able to build that bridge with the low-income families, marginalized communities, and invite them into town hall meetings and to discuss this, because we have that relationship with the community. So that's what CARAS is about. It's about building people up, giving them a voice, making the voices heard, and making them leaders out of the projects that we do. And climate is just one of them. But climate is clearly on our target list, and we appreciate Green Alliance to partner with, because it's important to really put the focus on these damaging effects, and it's not going to end. This past summer, we had tons of outages in Gilroy, power outages. We need to affect change. We also need to support our vulnerable communities, like our seniors. Where do they go when the power goes out? So there's a lot of stuff that we're going to be working with this issues, and then we're in support with Greenbelt Alliance, and that's how we're doing it in South County. But there's a lot of work to be done, for sure.
Thank you, Marty. Yeah, lots of work to be done, but we're so excited to continue to work with you and support the really, the critical work that you and your organization are doing. So, I now moving to Newark. Of course, in this project, in our Bay Area Resilience Hotspots project, we're diving deep into specific places to identify and advance local climate adaptation and resilience strategies, but we're also a regional organization. And so we're looking to promote equitable adaptation as a region as part of this project. So, Jonna, can you speak to how shoreline resilience strategies taken in one location, like hardening shorelines, can impact places around the Bay, and how Newark plays a role in that?
Sure, thank you. I do just want to remind all of us of what this beautiful Bay does for us today. And really, the Bay gives life to the whole ecosystem that we live in here. The marshes are the nursery of the Bay that gives us the food chain in the Bay, puts meals on our table. The marshes serve as a buffer for flooding and against rising sea levels. The marshes help to filter the pollutants that come out of our storm system and into the Bay. The marshes also sequester carbon even higher than some of our forests. So they sequester the carbon out of the air and store it. And I sometimes wonder, and I question, we as humans are burning fossil fuels and putting carbon into the atmosphere. And at the same time, we as humans have filled and buried 90% of the marshes, the wetlands, and the river areas. So as we were adding pollution, we were also taking nature's ability to fight pollution away. And we can't do that any longer. So we have to preserve the Bay and the habitats around the Bay for what they do for us, which is, really critical. So when you think about how are we going to protect ourselves from rising sea levels, we have to be reminded that water, does not understand lines on a map, and it's going to go wherever it can. So you mentioned earlier that some of the wealthier communities are starting to come up with shoreline adaptations, but those adaptations may disproportionately affect other communities, because if you harden one edge of the Bay, the water's going to flow elsewhere, whether that's to a neighboring community or whether it's even far north or far south in the Bay. New studies that have been done by scientists have recognized, for example, in Newark, if we were to harden the shoreline here, some of those effects may be felt all the way up to the Delta, just based on tidal flows, river flows, and the bottom of the bay. So how are we going to work in Newark, and what are we hoping to do here? You can see behind me is the Newark Baylands and San Francisco Bay. And there's the rail line, the Union Pacific rail line that runs from Oakland down to San Jose on the far edge of the photograph. This is one portion of the bay, which over 200, about 500 acres here, about 280 are already wetlands. It's historic bay, and it's that transition land in the bay. If you imagine, as we harden the shoreline in certain areas and as sea levels rise, water is going to displace and spread in other areas. And that water is also going to drown some of our outer marshes. We're in a race against time to allow the bay to have its lungs, to have the marshes. We need to be able to save places like Newark Baylands for the marshes to actually migrate inland. And so for those marshes to colonize these areas so that we have a nursery for the bay, so that we have an area that can sequester carbon and prevent flooding. So we are really, in our work as Citizens Committee, supporting nature-based solutions to sea level rise and to the protection of communities. That means maintaining and preserving, conserving as much of the remaining land around the bay, and there isn't much, so that we help not only Newark, but we help all the other communities from the displacement that will happen as we harden parts of the bay that have no other choice. So I think that's what's critical. If we're to preserve the beauty of the bay, the health, the vibrancy of the bay, we have to preserve these lands. And we need to preserve these lands for the economic benefits that they will convey as well. If we fill them, it's more area to protect. And we already have billions of dollars worth of real estate in the bay at risk. Anyways, love to talk more about it as we move into question and answer, but we need to let nature do work for us. And we do that by preserving its land.
Thank you, Jonna. Yeah, that's a great reminder of how interconnected we are, both as a region and with our natural environments. And it is so critically important. So another important part of building climate advocacy is spreading awareness about climate risks that the Bay faces and solutions that we can take to build resilience, including those nature-based solutions and how that plays a role. Alex, how does your organization work to educate local residents about climate risks and solutions? And how do youth factor in to your work?
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and answer the second part first. Marty brought up, and I'm really happy that he did, just the importance of youth engagement involvement when it comes to communal climate resilience. And that's definitely something, especially in more recent years, that Sustainable Solano has really tried to emphasize and push forward is youth advocacy and stewardship of climate issues and environmental issues in Solano. We typically take on high school age students and kind of take them through just like the basic curriculum and education of how climate change is going to be impacting Solano, or in this case Sassoon more specifically, and help them to develop their own sense and understanding of environmental justice, what it means to be an environmentally just and equitable community and city here in Solano. And from there, we empower them, or hopefully they feel empowered to then take what they've learned and help us conduct outreach and become community leaders and share the need for climate resilience here in Solano. So that could take the form of them just doing like basic like interpersonal outreach, door to door, or tabling, or in the past we've had them lead what we call flood walks, which are basically walking tours of the Sassoon Marina area that are going to be most impacted by flooding. So they really serve like the foundation of our outreach and our education to like the broader community. And with that, in terms of how we actually reach the community and hopefully provide that awareness and education of climate issues here in Sassoon, We do that through like, a few ways. So first, as we've already talked about is, the installation of green infrastructure projects in sustainable gardens. So through there, we hope to give kind of like a hands-on and material way that folks could connect concepts such as like, permaculture or, flood resilience or drought resilience to, their day-to-day lives. What they could do on an individual level to, shore up, their homes or, small, community centers of resilience. Additionally, we host, workshops, bringing guest speakers to bring, outside expertise here in Solano. And again, in service of, further educating and bringing awareness to the issue. And I guess sort of like the final type of awareness indication we try our best to impart is through the actual creation of the community action plan, bringing a, I guess, more civic and policy oriented awareness to the issue as well. And through this, we could talk about the science of climate change. We could talk about, the way it's going to impact our communities, but ultimately we need a way to sort of like translate those more I guess, high-minded concepts into like actual practice that community members could actually, engage in. And I think that's where the community action plan is really important. Bringing folks to the table, making it so, the like any type of policies, or, plans being set forward aren't, done in back rooms. And there's a real spotlight on the types of infrastructure and policies that the community wants to engage in and take on to, prevent, the detrimental impacts of climate change.
Thank you, Alex. And yeah, agreed that education on not just climate risk, but also how the local decisions can build resilience and how to get involved is something that I think we'll be working more on together. And I'm excited to be moving that along because it's so important. So right now we have just one more question and then we'll open it up to Q&A. I've seen a couple questions come in, but reminder, put your questions in the Q&A function or just directly in the chat box, and when we'll answer them in a minute. And they can be for myself on the project or for our panelists. Our panelists are wealths of knowledge. And so they'd be happy to answer any of your questions. But before that, I like to end my questions on a positive note, because this is about the opportunity that we have together. And just personally, I'm so excited to be working with each one of you on the next phase, because this is just the beginning. This is just the foundation setting. And after this comes the work that we get to do together. So that's personally what I'm so excited about. But a question from each of you is, looking forward to the year to come. What is something that you're really excited about in this space? It could be a project that you have moving forward, a new policy or program at the local, state, or federal level that you're excited about, or something where you see an opportunity, or something giving you hope lately. And Marty, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Sadi. For us in South County, I think number one is the education piece. We have to get the word out to our constituents and our clients that are in our communities in South County. I think that's very important to begin the next phase of this work, is education. Education is the key to inform people. Power, right? Knowledge is power. Giving the folks that knowledge about what is about climate change that's affecting your lives. That's it. That's number one. Communication is second. I think that we need to develop a communication strategy that speaks long and broad to reach those that are affected and those that are in the places of power, for them to understand this is really happening in our area. This isn't about a woke thing. This isn't about Democrats and Republicans. This is about an issue that's affecting all of us. And getting that message of communication across to everybody is important. And I think number three is that building the bridge, building the gap between stakeholders, community, and long-term projects with the state and and our county to develop a plan. Alex mentioned the action plan. Yes, we need a definite action plan that's going to spell out a roadmap. What do we do next? And how can we improve? And how can we grow? And how can we build the sustainability? How can we use this to mitigate the efforts that we're doing against these issues that we're facing? And I think doing that. So I'm excited this year coming up is to engage with the community, put it out there more, put it out there, keep that, speaking that message. We've done a ton of pop-ups. We've done a ton of community engagements with surveys of all sorts relating to climate. Now we got to take it to the next level. We need to start putting some really good formats about what this is about, what do we want to see accomplished, and create a resiliency hub that's going to be a warehouse where people can come in and find knowledge, but also get their needs met. When these things happen, they can get resources that's going to be paid through other means so we can give it out to the community when these things happen. And it's also educate our politicians. A lot of the politicians don't know that this is real. They think that it's fake. I had a coffee with the mayor and she looked at me like deer with headlights, but she didn't understand the fact that this is real. But we need to educate our leaders about this is a reality. It's not going to go away. How do we mitigate these issues? Because it's affecting everybody. And how do we support each other? And how do we get that funding source, a consortium of funding to bring to the table to start really doing some action plan work and bringing that forward? And then the last thing I would say is we want to create leaders, climate brokers, leaders of the community, youth leaders, adult leaders. They'll be the voice of climate change, to speak out what's happening in their own marginalized communities and how it's affecting them. I think that's very powerful. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. Lots to be excited about. Jonna, if you want to share a little bit about what you're excited about, and I do want to get to some Q&A. So I think if we could keep it briefer. I wish we had another hour.
I will say that I am energized by the focus that the state of California is now giving to climate change. I think it's been demanded of the state by the floods, right? By the fires. When nature's doing its thing in the background, we tend to ignore all the benefits it conveys upon us. But when nature goes awry, all of a sudden it gets attention, and boy, does it need attention. So I'm excited by that. With that, there's some money coming through the state legislature to begin to implement some of these nature-based climate resilience projects, which put the focus on nature and our ability to interact with it. And I think maybe the thing that I'm most excited about is in our newer work, we're seeing more and more young people get involved. Young people are going to be inheriting the decisions that we make today, and they want to be involved, and they want us to see us move in a positive direction. So I think I'll end there, and happy to answer questions about the beautiful land behind me.
Thanks, Jonna. Alex?
Yeah, so I moved to Solano County just within like the past, 13 months. And I think that it's a really exciting time for Solano, since a lot of the more long-term plans have been put forth, and there's like a great opportunity for climate resilience and climate equity to be included in these plans, to make sure that these ideas aren't, left on the back burner. So I think, just in terms of that sort of like social and political scape, it's really an exciting time in Solano. But then also just in terms of upcoming projects, I'm excited to hopefully continue our work with the Greenbelt Alliance and Susan Fairfield. So, hopefully we'll be able to continue our work in the area and continue fighting for resilience.
Thank you all. And these are our three partners that we're planning to work more with, but we have even more partners in our other hotspots locations. And so just a thank you to all of our partners, all of the people that have made this work possible. It really is you all that are why this is happening and at the core of it. So thank you. And now I'll go to some of our audience questions. We have some great questions coming in. You talked a lot about social vulnerabilities at the beginning. What does that mean? Great question. So briefly, social vulnerabilities can refer to all of the social and economic demographic factors that can make it harder for some people to respond and recover to a climate event. When we've seen wildfires, it's not just your location of your house in a wildfire risky area that makes you vulnerable. It can also be how you get information on an evacuation. Is that in a language that you speak? Do you have access to a vehicle to evacuate? Do you live with people that are older or have disabilities that make it harder for them to evacuate, or to leave medical devices, or to deal with wildfire smoke? And also after an event. So in a wildfire, do you have culturally appropriate resources and places to go for recovery? Right now, most of our resources are focused on homeowners and people that feel comfortable going to government services. So when we talk about social vulnerabilities, we talk about kind of all of those other aspects outside of physical, the physical risk that can really increase your risk in a climate hazard event, and really have huge disparities on how you can recover from that event. And especially a lot of that is tied up with, do you have a social safety net? Do you have that those economic resources to recover, which is a real challenge. Next question is, you said that in Sassoon, sea level rise would flood nearly the whole city. What can be done to stop that? And I see a question from Jay below about sharing engineering skills to help draft conceptual plans for a local project, so they can actually put them into construction bids. And I know Jay is he's a great advocate in Sassoon. So I think, and then getting down to Karen's question about nature-based solutions, I think we can wrap those all up together, and I'll invite also our panelists to jump into after me. But in places like Sassoon and Newark, we are big advocates for nature-based solutions. So that can mean a horizontal levee or living levee, and as well as using planning and policy tools to make sure that you're both physically protecting a place through stormwater design, green stormwater design, wetland restoration, and living levee. You can look more in our playbook or other resources to see. So usually a diagram helps explain that better, but basically a little mix of nature-based solutions and some physical wall building. Together we're going to need to really lean on nature. So restoring our natural ecosystems and protecting them, but also making sure we're planning together with our community to understand what are the options. And not all places will have the same, the same agenda. We can't do everything. We can't just kind of come in and say, this is what goes here, but we need to ask people and be real with the risks, because the risks are real. I mean, when we talk about 2100, kids born today, they're going to be alive then. Maybe not me, but they will. And so we really have to be having the real conversations about how we're, how maybe in some places we're going to be changing how we are living in a place, how we're living with water. And so I think there's a lot of great work that's being done. And in terms of kind of engineering skills, I think we're all about getting to on the ground projects, but starting with a community engaged process that makes sure that it's not a top-down process of, this is the levy you need, but instead starts with processes like Marty was saying, like Alex, like Jonna, of what do we need to see here? Who are the people that are going to be impacted? And bringing all of those points of view to the table to then get to those on the ground projects that we really need. So a little bit of mix of both, but definitely looking forward to seeing implementation going forward in new ways. And I'll open it up also if Jonna or Alex or Marty want to touch on any of that.
I want to go back to what you said, Sadi, about the social impacts. When we did a survey in the past, 40% of participants said that loss of work in childcare was key and critical. So when there's a power outage, how do they get they lose work? People lose work, they lose childcare, right? No air conditioning, 60% didn't have air conditioners. And so another key factor was that health concerns. 40% said that the impacts of smoke and wildfires impacted their health. That tells you a lot. Folks have conditions, medical conditions that we needed to address, poor quality air quality, and also outside working conditions. 40% said working outside, it's being unsafe. So there's a broad range of impacts. When we talk about social impacts, it affects a broad range, but you know what affects the most? The marginalized community. The poor community gets more affected than anybody else. Folks that are affluent, that have money, they can go buy an e-generator. There goes their power. They have power. But folks that are in apartments that don't have these things available to them, they don't have any resources. So socially it impacts them from work to loss of childcare to healthcare. So these are the things that people need. They need their medications stored in refrigerators. So it's across the board. The key is how do we get this data, which is critical. One of the key of building resilience is data. We need to start developing the databases, right? That's all there, that's all out there, and putting it together and inform stakeholders, inform and educate the stakeholders, our council members and our leaders, to let them know this is the data that speaks for itself. Well, you needed to address it, because when you don't address it, it's going to affect you. When there's a flood, you're responsible as a county leader or a city official to represent your constituents and have a center for them when there's a flood. So it works together. It works better if we all work together in addressing these issues, because it impacts one end all through to the other side of that spectrum.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marty. That is so true, and a good plug to stay tuned for the launch of our community profiles coming in July. But I'll turn it over to Zoe to close us out.
Thanks, Sadie, and thank you so much to Jonna, Alex, and Marty for sharing your wisdom with us. As Sadie mentioned, we wish we had more time to really, dive in deeper, and we really look forward to continuing to work with you across the region. This is really just the beginning. For those in the audience, please go check out the live Hotspots web portal if you haven't already, and stay and be on the lookout for the drop of our 5 community resilience profiles, which will be coming in July. We'll also be hosting outings throughout the summer to explore our hotspots locations firsthand. The first one is actually coming up on July 15th with the Sassoon City Flood Walk, led by Sustainable Solano, which will be super fun. I hope to see all of you there. And finally, Greenbelt Alliance, the Citizens to Complete the Refuge, Sustainable Solano, and CARAS are all local nonprofit organizations, and we would not be here without your support and the support of our generous donors. We really appreciate the interest in this webinar and this important work. Please follow us on social media and sign up for our email listserv to stay up to date with more Hotspots updates to come. And please be in touch. We look forward to seeing you all on our next webinar or in person on an outing. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your afternoon.